Hi everyone, my name is Tilley and welcome to my home sewing studio. I'm having a really excellent year. I started a new business where I'm taking my original patterns and packaging them for the home sewing market. My very first pattern came out May 2023, the Magic Pants pattern. And I want to make myself a pair of pants today, so I thought that might be a good excuse to walk y'all through how to choose what size you're going to use, how to cut the fabric out, and how to sew everything. So I'm going to have chapters on these videos so that you can go to right where you need help, and hopefully this can help you get started making your own pair of Magic Pants. Let's begin. Let's begin by taking a look at the back of the envelope. So here we have a quick description of the pant, a technical drawing so you can get an idea of what you're going to make, your fabric and supplies needed, which there are kind of a few amounts of materials here needed, so we'll walk through all of that. Your body measurements so that you can find what size you're looking for, and then the fabric requirement you need for that size. So you will find that I only am showing you the hip size, and that was an intentional choice on my part because this is a fairly relaxed garment. The waist is going to be something that's super adjustable that we can adjust on our body before we finish the garment. And so the hip is really the most important part, and I wanted to just kind of keep it simple and make it easy for people to find their size. When I say hip, what I mean is the widest part of your lower torso. So it doesn't because I feel like, people are measuring here and they're like, well, is that your hip? Don't worry about what that actually means. We're just looking for our widest side of our lower torso. So what I do is I'll wrap it around and I'll shimmy up and down until I find the widest point and take that measurement. So once we figure out that size, then we can look at fabric requirements. So for the most part, just about everybody is going to need 2.5 yards of fabric. If you have true 60-inch wide fabric, you can get away with a little bit less, but I kind of am understanding now that most boutique fabric stores are selling narrower fabric. So if it's like 55 inches, I still would just go for the bigger measurement, the 2.5 yards. And this is just going to be for the fabric for the main body of your pant. You will also need a pocket lining fabric, and there is an option for you to use the main fabric as your pocket lining as well. And so in that case, you would just want to add 1/2 yard to this measurement. So 3 yards is a really safe amount of fabric to purchase for this pant. Let's talk a little bit more about sizing, and let's take a look at the back of the instruction booklet. So this has the same information that you'd find on the envelope in addition to the finished garment measurements. Now, let me explain the benefit of looking at the finished garment measurements. So, for example, I am a 43-inch hip, and so that puts me smack in the middle of the large pant, okay? And if I go down to finished garment measurement, I see that the finished measurement is 50 inches. So that means that I'm going to have 7 inches of extra fabric around my hip if I make a large. And so that I can kind of already deduce that this is going to be kind of a looser fitting pant. If you wanted it to be a tighter fitting, maybe you would choose to go down a size. I am very straight-waisted, so I don't have a huge difference between my waist and my hip. If you are straight-waisted or apple-shaped, where you carry more of the weight on the upper body, I would stick with that hip measurement. If you are more pear-shaped or you have a bigger difference between your waist and hip ratio, then you might want to consider going down a size. So, for example, I'm making a pair of pants right now for my cousin, and they have a 31-inch waist and a 42-inch hip. So the 42-inch hip puts them at the lower end of the large, and then if I look at 31-inch waist at the finished garment measurement, that's at the very low inch, the side of the large. So I think for them, I'm going to go down to a size medium, And it means that they're going to have a little bit less ease around the hips, but they're also not going to have excessive ease around the waist. So that's my biggest takeaway for sizing. If you're really unsure about what to do, the safest thing is always to go up a size because it's so much easier to take it in towards the end. And we'll have a chance to manipulate kind of the leg size and fullness and do a little tweaking before we completely finish the garment at the end. The other thing I want to point out for finished garment measurements is the inseam. So for every size, the inseam is 27.5 inches. Now for me personally, that's 5 inches shorter than I would prefer to cut. And the reason why I did this is because that was the max amount of space I had on the paper that I'm using to print my pattern on. So I just had a printing constraint. But it's very, very easy to add length to this pant, and I'll talk more about that when we go over the pattern pieces. Another thing you might want to look for here is the front rise and the back rise. If you have, if you know that you have a short torso or you don't like things as high-waisted as I do, then you might want to consider lowering that. And I have a line on the pattern where you can do that. So now that we've determined what size we're going to use, we need to cut out our pattern pieces. Let's review the pattern pieces and the other materials you're going to need to finish this garment. So first you have the main body fabric that's going to be in the front panel, the back panel, and the pocket facing. You're also going to want to use your main body fabric for your D-ring strap, for your main strap, and for the two tiny little pieces there, which is your strap opening facing. Those will be easy to get. You also have two pieces that make up the pocket bag, here and here. And you can choose to use your main body fabric for that. If you have a thicker fabric, I would recommend going with something thinner like a quilter's cotton here, but I do think you can get a really nice finished look with if you just use your same main body fabric for your pocket bags. The final fabric you need is a stretch ribbed knit for this ribbed panel here. Now it's only 14 inches tall by 5.5 inches wide, but if you're getting fabric by the yard, you're probably going to go ahead and need to get a half a yard so that you can meet that 14 inches tall. A couple things I want to point out on the paper pattern is this strap piece. So it's one piece and then you pick what size you want to do. If you want max adjustability, I would recommend going up a size or two than what you're cutting out for the main body, just so that you have that flexibility when you go to fit your waist. Also, since this pattern is on the newer side, I have started to notice that the extra small and small strap is maybe a little bit smaller than it needs to be. So if you are an extra small or small, I would recommend cutting up a size or two just to be safe. Again, I want to talk about determining your inseam. So right now, if you were to cut this, you're going to end up with 28-inch unhemmed inseam. And so if you want your final inseam to be 28 inches, then you need to make sure that you add hem allowance. I like to sew really like tall seams for my hem just because I think they look pretty, and I turn mine up 3 inches. So if my final inseam is 30 inches and then I want a 3-inch hem, then that means I need to add 5 inches here. And you can tell that it is a right angle here and here. So all you have to do is just go straight down from this line and straight across, and you're going to be golden. I would maybe even recommend going ahead and taping it to your pattern so that you don't accidentally forget and cut anything too short. So I do have to make you think a little bit here, but I promise you, you can do it. And then here is your guide for lengthening or shortening the rise. I didn't have a lot of options for where to put this because I didn't want to put it above this little corner here, because then that would mean that you were starting to change the entire pocket, which would mean you'd have to change all the pieces relating to the pocket. So hopefully I gave you enough here, and you're just going to have to do your best to kind of re-true this curve as you shorten this. I promise you, you can do it. It's going to be great. This rectangle indicates where your strap opening is going to be. You are not going to cut this when you go to cut out your original garment. This is going to be just a guide for you to place your strap opening. So if you want, you could just cut out this rectangle so that then when you could go through it and mark with your pattern. I'll show you when we get there. But that's what that's going to be. For the ribbed panel, you really want a ribbing that has stretch in it, like a elastane, lycra, spandex. And it's very easy to find a nice quality ribbed knit at Joann's. The limitation is that they really don't have a ton of color options. They've got white, they've got black. I found a couple other colors, but for the most part, that's all they've got. So, you know, of course, if you're doing a unique colored pant, you know, the ribbed panel is hidden, but it does look nicer if it's kind of a closer color match to your fashion fabric. And so I do have on my website where you can buy a notion kit where I have taken that white fabric and dyed it a bunch of different colors in hopes of giving you some really good options. And I've also gone ahead and cut it down to its final dimensions, folded it in half and serged it. So I've done the first step of sewing it, so you won't have to do it when you get to the instructions for using this. So I have provided that option there, but they do have some easy enough by the yard options at Joann's. And then I even had a student in one of my last Magic Pants class that found kind of pre-cut, like ribbed panels that she was able to get off of Amazon. So there are options out there. I just would highly encourage you to have something with stretch in it so that it can help it bounce back and give you a good hold around your waist. You're also going to need 2 1.5 inch D-rings, 2 snaps. Now you've got options here. I really like these size 10 Dritz sew-on snaps because they're nice and big and easy to see for sewing. But I've also had success using like snaps that you can connect with like a snap setter such as this with like that has kind of those claws that lock together. You can also use a button and buttonhole situation and not even do the snaps. So there's a lot of creative variety here when it comes to securing the straps on your body. You will need a piece of like a 9-inch piece of elastic. Here I'm using this 2-inch kind of non-roll elastic. I like this because it's really rigid. It'll help hold its shape. And it's the same width as our strap, but you're not going to see this. So this is very variable depending on what kind of elastic you have available in your studio. And the final thing is twill tape. So the twill tape step is not absolutely necessary for every fabric option. If you have a really stable cotton, like if you were using like a lightweight canvas, you're really not going to need this because it's already stable on its own. But I designed this pant for linen, and linen has a tendency to stretch and relax as you wear the fabric. And so for that case, you want something like twill tape to help stabilize all of the seams that are going around your waist to keep them from stretching out. Sometimes people also like to use this on their pocket opening so that that can stay really tight and close to the body. I don't have you putting it on the pocket opening because I like this area to be a little bit looser, so it's really easy for me to stick my hands in my pockets. So if you were wondering why I didn't put this on the pocket opening, I just didn't find it was necessary. In terms of what kind of twill tape you need, you're not going to see this, so it's really variable. I have found over my time that I really like the medium weight twill tape because it just is a little bit less flimsy than the lightweight stuff. And this is 3/4 inch, which is probably not necessary. You could probably get away with a 1/2 inch. It's really variable. All this is stabilizing. I mean, you could even hack this with any kind of stable ribbing or edging that you might have that you could stick in the inside of your garment. Now that we have all our materials together, let's start cutting out our fabric. I got this yummy, super lightweight window pane linen from Blackbird Fabrics. I serged the edges and gave it a good wash and dry, so now I'm really ready to cut it out. The first thing that I do typically when I'm deducing how I'm gonna cut out a garment is I'll start by just folding it in half, selvage to selvage. I do have the bigger challenge with this fabric with pattern matching. So I will have to troubleshoot that as well. So I'm gonna start with just folding it selvage to selvage. Okay. And I did not have to pre-cut out my pieces because I have these original manila pieces that I will use. So the reason why you can get away with half as much fabric with a wide fabric is because you are able to put the pant legs side by side when cutting. But for most fabrics that aren't 60 inches wide, you're not gonna have this option. So that what that means is that each leg has to be cut end to end, okay? And some strategies that I always employ when I'm cutting out a garment is I will start by just laying out every single piece, making sure that I have enough room to fit everything. And then once I can guarantee that, I will start with cutting out the biggest pieces first and then progress to the smaller pieces. Because of course, for our strap opening piece that's this big, we're gonna be able to fit it anywhere on this fabric. So I have 3, I think I might even have a little bit more than 3 yards of fabric here. So I know I'm gonna be good, but let's just double check. I'm really glad that I'm laying everything out right now, because if you can see, when I do these pant legs end to end, I literally have exactly enough fabric with maybe an inch extra. So that means that I can't be too casual with where this goes. I need to put it right at the edge to maximize my amount of fabric so that I can get this in. And what's interesting was I'd ordered 3 yards of linen, and after measuring it, after it being washed, it has shrunk 10 inches. So exactly the reason why you need to pre-wash your fabric, because can you imagine if you'd sewed this whole thing and then you'd wash it, and how if it's half as much, it probably would have shrank 5 inches, and you might not have wanted culottes. So I'm really glad I pre-washed this linen, and I'm glad I had just enough. So I can do the 2 legs, and then let's see if I can get all my other pieces in here as well. So I could do this piece over here and then get my pocket pieces here, and then this here. Oh yeah. Really, the trickiest part is that leg, okay? So we're gonna be in good shape. I just have to make sure that I put this right to the edge when I start. So let's start cutting. Now that I completely pinned my fabric in half along the selvage edge, and I pinned at regular intervals so that this window pane would be lined up on both sides of the fabric. I've never actually done that before. Usually I'm not that disciplined, but today. And then I also, because linen can be wiggly, I made sure to line up my straight grain, and then I weighted that edge, as well as lined up my cross grain with a ruler just to make sure that it's on grain, because linen can be a bit wiggly. And so now I'm ready to cut out my first piece. I don't like to pin into the paper onto the fabric. I know a lot of people do that. I don't do it just because it never was a habit of mine. So what I'm gonna do is trace the piece with a piece of chalk, and then I can cut out the pattern pieces. The way I handle marking notches on the paper and then as well as transferring them onto the fabric is I just do a little 1/4 inch snip with my store-bought notcher. Likewise, you could just cut a little V into your paper. Then when you get to the notch, you can simply mark it with your chalk and then give yourself just a 1/4 inch snip into both layers of the fabric. You don't want to cut much more than a 1/4 inch because you don't want to get into that 1/2 inch seam allowance. But I find this to be the easiest and fastest way to notch fabric. On other home sewing patterns, you'll see things like maybe where there's a V that you cut out, and that works just as well. I find them a little bit more fiddly to work with, and so I like how quick and easy this is, but you do have to be careful not to cut too deep. Sometimes they can be kind of hard to see. Try my notching technique, see if you like it. If you don't, try a different one. I mean, it's all about exploration and what works for you. Now that I cut my front, I can go ahead and cut my back. I have just enough. And I used these stripes actually to help me as a guide. So I made sure to line up the bottom of my pant with one of the stripes so I know that that's gonna match. And then to determine how to match my out seams to my front, I just took where I actually cut the out seams of the front right on one of these lines. So then for this, I knew I needed to go 1 inch over of the line so that they could match up perfectly, and consequently it is right on the edge of the fabric. So I'm gonna just have to cut this open. You know, honestly, I have not really done a ton of plaid sort of projects, but it's actually kind of fun. It just requires a little bit more thought. After you cut out your 2 back panels, you're gonna need to make this mark for the strap opening. So what I did on my pattern was I just cut that rectangle out, that guide that I give you, and we're gonna use this as a marking tool. So I'm gonna lay my pattern piece on the right side of my fabric. So I'm marking on the outside of my fabric, and I'm gonna mark that rectangle. So there's my mark. And then now I'm just gonna do the same thing to the other side. Another thing you can do at this point, if you want to go ahead and do it, is making a mark for where the back is going to fold over to create the top of the back waist. I prompt you to do it later in the book, but clearly you're an overachiever because you're watching this video, so you can go ahead and mark it now. Let me show you how I do that. So on page 6, step 1, I tell you to mark a guideline along the top of each back leg on the wrong side from notch to notch, aka 3 inches down from and parallel to the top edge. So if you want, you could go ahead and do that now that it's easy, you've got the pieces on the table. So let's go ahead and do that. And we said the wrong side, so it needs to be opposite from where we marked this, which can be a little tricky when you're working with a fabric that looks the same on both sides. So this guide that we're marking right now is going to line up with these 2 notches on either side, and be parallel to our 3-inch line here. On the wrong side of the fabric. Strap opening mark goes on the right side of the fabric, and then this little top waist edge mark goes on the wrong side. And then you're just making sure that you're notching your leg panels and the back panel is ready for sewing. These stripes make it super easy to line up the grain, but definitely don't forget to line up your grain. The only pieces I have left to cut out are all my pieces that require interfacing, and I have a little trick for how I do this. So let's go over to the ironing board. I like to begin by just rough cutting the pieces that I need to be interfaced for something like this. So let's start with the D-ring strap. We only need one piece, so I've gotten a piece that's big enough for me to cut this out. Then I like to find a big enough piece of interfacing that is going to fit like so. I don't even bother cutting this down. What I'll do is I'll just give this a quick press. I'll make sure not to touch the interfacing that's not touching fabric, like this. So once this is initially set, I'll then mark my pattern piece. And since I didn't fully press this little piece, I can just pull this edge off, and now I can still reclaim this smaller piece for another use. Once I've finally cut it out, then I'll give it a really good press, and it's good to go. For cutting out the straps, I'll start with 2 layers of fabric that are tall enough for me to get 2 sets of straps in one piece. So I'm going to be cutting at this large line right here, and it's going to go here to here. So now I'll make sure I have a piece of interfacing that can cover that area. Can double check it again. Yeah, we got plenty here. I'll give this an initial press to start activating that fusible. I don't use any kind of fancy interfacing. I like the cheap lightweight stuff. I know other people have opinions. Just use the one you want. You don't need a super heavy hold here. Again, I didn't touch the part here that doesn't have fabric behind it, and I'll mark the straps and cut those out. And now I can peel this off and save this for my next project. And I'll hit these again and really get that interfacing secured now. And that's how I cut out 2 sets of straps with one piece being interfaced and one piece not. The final piece that we need interfaced is 2 two tiny rectangles that are going to serve as our strap opening facing. Because I've made so many of these, I've made myself sort of this little like template, and so I can cut out one rectangle that'll give me two facings, and then I even have the little marking guide that I can go ahead and mark the inner rectangle. And now that I'm thinking about it, I maybe should just have this be what the pattern piece looks like. I don't know, it's kind of just dawning on me now that maybe I should do that. I'm learning. Okay, so again, I'm making sure I've got a big enough piece with a little extra. Give it an initial hit with the steam iron. And then here I can go ahead and mark my rectangle that's going to be the first step in our sewing instructions. So this was just the way that I found to speed up the process since I was making so many of these straps. You can just use a ruler or whatever measuring tools you like to use. And here I'm making sure that I'm marking this with like a fine pin. It's not going to be seen, and that just gives me like the sharpest line compared to, you know, like this marking tool kind of gives me a fat line. The chalk kind of gives me a fat line. So I really like using like a sharp fine pin for this step because this is going to be a sewing guide. Same drill, I'm going to cut these two facings out. So that's what you're going to end up with in terms of the facing pieces you need for the strap opening. And you, however you get here works, you know, this is just the way that I've been doing it. We now have all of our pieces cut out. Everything that needs to be interfaced is interfaced. We've got the back panel marked for the strap opening, and I've also got my ribbing panel and all my extra notions ready to go.